There it is. Okay. There we are. Okay. Sorry for that. Well, my first attempt at public speaking, and I'm talking at the big room. All right, in an effort to make this presentation both informative and entertaining, I'd like to start with a little story about my first encounter with the 15 GP22. It was late in the 1950s. I was about 12 years old. I was already tinkering around with old used black and white TV sets that I had been given for free. On Saturdays, I'd take the bus over to the Egyptian Theater with a buddy to see the Saturday afternoon matinees, and between the bus stop and the theater was an old-time TV repair shop. And they had great big plate glass windows, and one side of the shop was the showroom and the front counter, and the other side was the workshop, and they had a workbench right in front of the window, and there was a copper-plated chassis with a very odd-looking picture tube on it. And I looked at that thing over and over, and I just couldn't imagine what the heck that thing was. So that thing sat there in the window for probably over a year. And one day I got up the courage to walk into the TV repair shop and ask the owner what the heck it was. And he said it was a color TV, but it didn't work very well. And I mean, I was just flabbergasted, a color TV. I couldn't even imagine a color TV. So anyhow, that picture of that image of that chassis and that funny-looking picture tube just haunted me for over 40 years. The old TV repair shop is long torn down, and the Egyptian Theater is gone. And sometime in about the, I would guess the period of around 2003 or thereabouts, I stumbled across Pete's website. And there I finally satisfied this haunting image of what this thing was that I had seen back when I was 12 years old, and it turned out to be the 15 GP22. So my hobbies slowly progressed, and pretty soon I came upon John Folsom. My mom winters in Florida, and I had been acquainted with John by telephone. And once when I was down visiting Mom, I gave John a call, and he invited me over to see his collection. Well, needless to say, I was duly impressed. And anyhow, we got to talking about his fledgling project to rebuild the 15 GP22. And he showed me the initial stem that he had made up, that he had made from Fredericks. And in any event, that was probably the point at which I got hooked on 15 GP22s, because at John's house, of course, there are many, many 15 GP22s. Let's see here. Okay. To understand the 15 GP22 problems, you need to understand its construction and why the tube was constructed this way. At the onset of development by RCA of the 15 GP22, the photodeposition method of placing phosphors hadn't been developed yet. So silk screening was employed on a flat glass piece of plate glass. The components needed to be mounted inside of an envelope, and that necessitated somehow of sealing the front and back half of the envelope. Well, frit glass hadn't been developed either, but glass to metal fusion had been well documented and was being done successfully in black and white tubes. So they decided naturally to fuse a metal ring to the two halves of the glass tube and then weld the thing closed. But as we shall see, that's easier said than done. The components inside of a vacuum pose a heat transfer issue, and a result resulting problem with cool the tube too fast and you could crack the glass plate or distort the Invar shadow mask. Developing a weldable Kovar flange was another total problem. In order to fuse glass to the Kovar, a heavy gauge ring was required so that the Kovar ring would not distort or melt during the high temperature process of fusing the glass to the Kovar. Unfortunately, that would have necessitated a high welding current to weld the two rings together, and that would have transferred heat back into the glass and caused cracking of the glass to Kovar bond. So what they decided to do was to fuse a heavy gauge Kovar ring to a light gauge stamping, and the light gauge stamping wouldn't necessitate the high amount of current. It wouldn't transfer the amount of heat into the glass Kovar joint, and as a result, you'd also be able to have flexion of the front and back halves of the tubes when you apply a vacuum. Let's see now. Okay, there's a picture of the two halves of the tube before the insides are put into it. It's molded from soft soda lime glass, and the glass was bonded at the factory to the prefabricated Kovar rings. Kovar is used because it has a coefficient of expansion that's nearly similar or identical to glass. Kovar is comprised of approximately 29% nickel, 17% cobalt, 53% iron, has traces of silicon, manganese, and carbon. It's very hard and quite difficult to machine. Kovar can be TIG welded or brazed with copper or gold alloys or nickel silver. There are two glass to Kovar bonds. There are two Kovar to Kovar laminating bonds formed by resistance welding, and one Kovar to Kovar TIG weld. So we end up with 5 joints that can and do pose leakage problems. This is a view of the 5 internal components. You've probably seen this on various websites, and it's a commonly known photograph. There are 5 major items. There's a whole bunch of fasteners, and the 5 components are the 2 support frame rings, which are, whoops, back. There we go. This ring and this ring sandwich the Invar shadow mask. This is the phosphor dot plate, and this is the familiar trim plate that you see in the front, the decorative ring. The subassembly is fastened to the rear section of the envelope by means of 3 studs that are mounted on the rear Kovar ring inside the tube. Invar is a high nickel alloy, and it's used for shadow masks because it has a very low coefficient of expansion. Therefore, Invar is stable over a wide range of temperatures, and it doesn't distort dimensionally enough to alter the relationship of the holes in the mask to the dot triads when its temperature changes. Okay, this is an internal, an enlarged cross-section drawing of the Kovar ring showing the many